Mediator and AutoMapper with Jimmy Bogard.
The Azure and Devops podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using the latest in .NET, Azure, AI, and DevOps. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. The show is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a full-service software architecture and engineering firm. Find them at www.clearmeasure.com. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast and deliver quality and run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that the .NET ecosystem has to offer. The podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, and you can find them on www.clearmeasure.com. My guest today on the show is Jimmy Bogard. He's a returning guest, and really he's a true heavyweight in the .NET open source world, someone whose work has quietly but profoundly shaped the way countless of developers build software. He's the creator and maintainer of two of the most widely used open source libraries in the .NET ecosystem, AutoMapper and MediatR. And if you've ever tried to simplify object mapping or decouple application logic, well, chances are you probably use his tools. He's based in Austin, Texas. He's an independent software consultant and a perennial recipient of the Microsoft Most Valuable Professional Award every year since 2009. That's more than a decade and a half of consistent and community-driven excellence. On the AutoMapper side, it's been around for, over 17 years. It's racked up hundreds of gazillion downloads. It started as a personal tool to streamline development for client projects, and it's grown into a global standard for Object Mapper. Jimmy was last on the show in episode 254, we were talking about the topic of Azure modernization. A lot's happened since then, but we'll include a link to that show in the show notes. And on a personal note, Jimmy and I worked together back when we were both in our 20s. So I've enjoyed the professional relationship as well as the friendship along the way. So Jimmy, welcome back to the show. How are you, sir?
Doing great, doing great. Actually, we worked on the same project that gave rise to, spawned AutoMapper, so it's that old.
a lot of history. But wow. Well, there's a lot of people who use your tools, but there's always some listeners out there who don't and maybe haven't heard you speak at one of the many conferences that you've spoken at. So just go back a little bit, because you've got a family with kids and you've been coding. You're in you'd say midlife. And you still love programming. And so what are the key things along the way that have just kept you invigorating and saying, man, I love being a computer programmer?
Yeah, I do love programming. I got to admit, though, I still hate CSS. It's still just the absolute worst. That has never changed since I've started, developing on the web. I don't know. I guess for me, it's still that little dopamine rush when you program something and you see it work. There's just this, it worked. And then you just keep building and building and building. And you get to the top of the mountain, you look back and oh my God, I can't believe I've come this far building something that everything is just this little bit incremental step. So I don't know. I've always loved that, since programming in high school or whatever, that it's just that little bit of feedback rush of something you built is working, even if it's this little bitty thing is, I don't know. It's hard to beat that feeling.
Yeah. Nice. Well, you've got two libraries. I mean, you do more than that, but MediatR and AutoMapper, you could say are a lot of people use them. But you've been kind of strategizing about where to take them and what the future holds. And you've announced it in various ways. Just but for the people who haven't heard, what are your plans for those two?
Oh yeah, so those two have been open source free and open source sent for both of them for over 10 years. But in the last 6 months, I made the decision to commercialize both of those projects. The goal is still to keep them open source in some form or fashion, but then also include a commercial offering for both of those.
Okay. There's been a lot of tools that start off as kind of this open source tool or freeware tool. It's like, hey, look at this. And then over time, it's like, you know what? let me start offering services around this or in some way commercializing it while at the same time it's still open source. And some people could be confused, like, wait a minute, what does exactly mean? I'm thinking Octopus Deploy. I'm thinking in service bus. I'm thinking, I mean, there's just, if you go back in history, there's lots of things that grew up, and then the creator of it looks at it and says, you know what? There's a lot of people who need my help because they're using it, and then they figure out some sort of business model. So, so what exactly does that mean, specifically for people who are, using both tools, and how should they think about that?
Sure. So specifically, I'm looking at a dual license model, and the way that works is you basically have, it's still effectively one license, but if you can't meet the license agreement of one of the licenses, and usually it's a copyleft license, which means it's a LGPL type of license where it says, if you're using this and you're not abiding by the sort of commercial license, then you need to share and share alike. You need to then share whatever you're building as well. So the idea is you still have a OSI open source license, but if you very often see this with things like MongoDB. You did this a couple of years ago as well. It's like, okay, they put it out open source, but other companies are making money off of their tool. And so wait a second, that's not fair. So then these kinds of licenses say, well, if you're building something off it or you're extending it, then those changes should be pushed back into the library. But basically the idea is I still wanted to have some version of open source. But then there's a lot of other companies that they may just make source open, but they don't have a OSI approved license. So good examples Identity Server is source open, but you need a commercial license to actually deploy it into production or deploy it in a commercial, whatever, under their license terms. So I thought, let's start with the dual license to see if people like it. Cause a lot of this is just, I have no idea what folks will or will not want with this. So I thought, well, we'll just still be able to keep an open source license. But then dual license to say, if you are going to use it in a commercial setting, then you're required to get a commercial license. And if you don't want to do that, well, then you have to, then you make your stuff open source as well. Yeah. That sort of thing.
Now, just so happens with this open source world, most of the people that use open source don't actually ever look at the source. They just use it because it's effectively freeware. It's like, hey, here's something. You just, it's in the NuGet listing. Okay, use that library. Great. And they go about their way. For people who just kind of use either of those libraries, does anything change for them?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm not looking at any sort of open core model. That's another popular model for commercializing open source. Is you have the core of your product that is free for anybody to use and is open, is permissive licensing, and then you have features you add on top of it. That I didn't think that model would work for me. So from just a usage perspective, I mean, the most you have to put in is your license key. But even then, I don't want to crash your app if your license is expired or something like that. It's just a lot of this is I don't want to annoy people. And I don't want to put a bunch of burden on myself because I'm the only one managing all this. So whatever's easiest for everybody. The goal is really that, large corporations that use it, that, are for-profit corporations, they're getting a benefit out of it. So I want those companies to pay for it. Yeah. But otherwise, the libraries themselves, the big thing that would change for me is that now I would actually have time to work on these things. That was one of the big motivations for me is going independent 5 years ago, I had made this terribly naive assumption that it would afford me time to work on all this open source. But the reality was I actually just worked on my company. I didn't work on the open source stuff at all. So part of this is well, if I want these things to have to continue to grow and improve and not just kind of slowly die over time, then there needs to be some sort of revenue tied to it. That's just the reality of it.
So for people who maybe they've used it for a long time, what is the category of usage of just going to NuGet, boom, I got the DLL now and I'm using, what is the category of usage which they'll never have to pay anything, and what is the category of usage where they will at some point have to pay for a license?
Oh, yes. So, and I got this all finalized with the lawyers. This is what took quite a long time before I could even talk about it because I don't want to talk about things that lawyers would
Sure.
be like, nope, that's not, nope, that doesn't work.
Right.
So first of all, I wanted to have free for any non-commercial usage. So if you're using it for hobbyists, students, or a non-commercial project company, then it would be free to use. Because again, that goes to the spirit of like, I want to charge companies that are using it for their, things that make them money as well. And if it's just a hobby project or just say it like, then no, you don't require I don't want to charge you for that. But the second part was, understanding that there's a lot of small companies out there that any license fee could be like a significant hit to their revenue. So I looked at a revenue target, like you only have to pay if you're over a certain revenue amount. And right now that's 5 million US gross revenue. And that seemed like a good amount. We're like, well, if you're making $5 million as a company, then you're doing pretty good, I think. I mean, I'm not to say that if you're making $1 million, it's not, but I don't know. I talked to a lot of other companies or a lot of other folks that made the same journey. And some of the feedback I also got from them was like, I mean, when you look at developer salaries, $1 million in revenue is not actually that much. That's still a pretty small company. And I think back to like when we were at our company together at Headspring years ago. We had to hit a certain size before we hit that $1 million revenue, and that was about the time when it's like, okay, we're like a decent sized company. It's not just five of us in a room sort of thing. So that was the idea as well. It's like I want to have a pricing model that kind of allows companies to grow within, like if they're a very small company, then like don't charge. But once you hit a certain revenue, okay, now you're successful and good. So now you charge some and kind of go from there.
Okay. So for all the software out there that is running in production, and it's using AutoMapper and it's using MediatR, and of course it's using the version was complete open source freeware. When upgrading, what version triggers the new license obligations for the bigger companies?
The version that is not out. So
the version's not out.
Yeah, that part is not done. So yeah, it's that's the another big thing I had to figure out was should it become a completely new package to the side with a different name, different ID, and all that stuff, or keep the existing one? And I got kind of both feedback of like, well, what you should really do is do a hard fork, create a new name, blah, blah, blah. But then that makes it actually pretty hard for existing users who want to upgrade to do that upgrade.
Yeah.
So I plan on keeping the same package ID. So when you upgrade to the next major version that comes out for both of those, one, it also require license acceptance. So you may have seen that sometimes. NuGet's like, hey, you need to accept this. So I will pop that up to like let people know, hey, license change. This is the new license terms. You need to agree to this, blah, blah, blah. But the existing versions will stay. I mean, it's not something that I could even decide to do at all, but like those existing versions will stay forever. Like you can continue to use, and this is the critical feature of NuGet actually, that you cannot delete old packages. You cannot delete old versions. They stay there forever. I mean, which is good and bad, right? If there's a security problem, then you can be like, if you're using all existing versions, those stay there forever. Even if I try to delete them from NuGet, like they still stay on NuGet servers and you can still download them. So like I couldn't even do anything nefarious and be like, burn it all down or something. Like that's not possible. So those versions stay forever.
I remember that being part of the debate when Microsoft was standing up NuGet.org, and they were analyzing even how NPM, and of course Microsoft bought NPM, but that being critical architecture when the whole packages.config was originally coming into .NET was the question of, okay, before the era of package managers, every DLL dependency was put in source control so that when you went back in time and whatnot, you could always actually get the version of the software at that point in time. And if the DLLs were not in there, well, what if I need to go back in time to do a hot fix? And now I'm trusting that NuGet is going to have the exact dependency at that point in time, that means, okay, every version from the beginning of time has to always be there, or architecturally that model would be broken.
I remember the first time I uploaded a bad DLL to NuGet and like, oops, let me go replace that. And they said, you can't replace a version. Like, I better make really sure I don't upload junk up there.
Yeah.
That breaks everybody. But yeah, it's definitely a trade-off for them, because NPM at one point allowed you to delete packages. And what was it, left pad, I think? That's where like a critical package was deleted and broke everyone's build, because someone like at one point NPM allowed you to actually delete the package from their package repository, and so they could break you to even try to build an existing system. Right. So yeah, even if I wanted to, those existing versions are there. So the other thing I'm doing is we'll be tagging and branching the last open source version of those, like a last existing licensing of those. So if folks ever want to go back to say, well, let me get the last Apache version, that it's there available for them, because that's something else that I don't want to do, is like remove the code of those existing versions. Mm-hmm. So we'll be relicensing it, and the existing versions will stay there as is.
Yeah. So it looks like on AutoMapper, the current major version is 14, and for MediatR, the current major version is 12, or actually 12.5 as of April. So 12 and 14. So I'm guessing you'll rev the major version, and then beyond that, people need to think about.
Yeah, although maybe I'll do like Apple's doing, where they're changing their iOS version numbers to just the year, because everyone's like, well, it's iOS 15, but this is 2025. What's the math? I probably won't do that, but
No, you should do like AutoMapper Jelly Bean and MediatR White Fox. Make it real confusing.
Just really confusing on folks, just to throw them way off.
Wasn't that an Android version, Jelly Bean?
Yeah, they like Eclair and all sorts of things. Yeah.
Right, yeah. Get creative.
I wish it works when there's like 6 versions, but as soon as there's like 15, I can remember. I mean, even
exactly.
Mac OS is like what, Yosemite? I don't even know what it's on now. Who knows?
All right. We talked about licensing, business stuff. Companies can hire you for consulting around this. Obviously, that's kind of what you do, and that's awesome. But let's pull back a little bit. And let's talk about MediatR first. For the developers who are like, MediatR, I've heard of it, I never used it. What might they be wrestling with, where if they just used MediatR, their life would be simpler?
So I could talk about where it came from and sort of where it helped us. So we went through a journey of trying to standardize the application, basically the application layer of our more complex systems. And we basically arrived at the point where instead of having every single kind of API endpoint or HTTP endpoint being its own like special snowflake, we found it beneficial to say, let's make these things look all exactly the same. And what I mean by that is we have exactly one model going in, the DTO or data transfer object that's just like, here's all the inputs on one single object, one single type. It goes to one class that has one method called handle, and then that returns a single response. So that helped us reason about our application that said, basically the features or use cases of our application are all modeled exactly the same way, with one model in, handler, and one model going out. So for larger applications, that helped us better organize all the sort of initial use case logic of the system. So for every kind of user interaction or operation that's performed, it all looks exactly the same. Once you do that, though, once you get this uniform interface of one model in, handler, and one model going out, that's when we started borrowing from other communities, other like functional sort of style things of saying, well, what if you want to log every single application use case request? What if you want to add validation for every single one? What if you want to we were doing it for auditing as well. We wanted to say, well, what user performed which action? You can do that at the sort of web application layer with things like filters and ASP.NET Core.
Yeah.
But what we quickly saw is that there's important missing context of what actual operation was the user trying to perform. With that level, you basically just have like HTTP variables or HTTP body that you can't even read twice. You can only read once. So you had all these sort of limitations to getting sort of richer information, richer behaviors. So we wanted to have that sort of same feel that the ASP.NET Core side has, of this kind of, it goes to one method to do the HTTP stuff and have filters around it. We wanted to do that one level below, which is at the application level, to be able to have that sort of cross-cutting things, that sort of stuff. But part of that too is helping to organize the application logic in our system. So we started organizing all of our systems around each of those use cases. We called it feature folders at first, then slices. Some of the clean folks call it use case, like use case oriented organization. But it's basically a similar idea of you kind of group all the things related to a specific user action, feature, use case all together. And that kind of architecture of single model in, handler, single model out, along with everything related to that feature, this library helps enable that style architecture.
Okay. And I'm thinking of CQRS, or even just simply commands and queries. When you were describing that, I see so many applications, because I've been consulting as well for a long time. So many applications where we're using .NET, it's object oriented, but the resulting code is not actually object oriented. It's just structural in nature, where we have classes and methods, and from top down, from some UI code, it's some code in a method calling other code in a method, which calls some other code in a method, and you look and see, well, what are the objects that are there? And maybe at best you have a customer object that Entity Framework is persisting, yet an order object that Entity Framework is persisting. And those are the only objects in the whole application. Everything else is just a holder for methods that do some things and then call another method, call another method, call another method. I think it's magical. What excites me is this library kind of holds your hand and says, no. Just let's model everything as an object. And then that changes so much about the code base. It
was the end result of like years of refactoring, of trying different techniques of like, we did like sort of these big, massive service classes that had tons of methods, but that broke the interface segregation principle, because like you were only ever using one of those service methods. We also found issues, especially when the application started to grow and having a lot of different, variety of use cases, that there was nothing sort of telling the developer that, hey, you shouldn't just call into someone else's object over here just because you see it exists. When we model these things as handlers, it's an explicit, it's an explicit modeling technique where we say, oh, this set of code in here is dedicated for this one specific use case. Yeah. And if we see code that should be reused across use cases or even amongst two, then we'll intentionally put that out into somewhere else. Just, standard refactoring, DRY, all those, old principles we grew up on, is like, then we'll pull those things out. It was when we had all the use cases centrally located in central classes that people were just calling anything they wanted, in sort of the guise of, well, don't repeat yourself, but also that would introduce coupling. So if I changed some function that multiple classes were using, I had to really make sure that I wasn't breaking anyone. So we decided, let's make that an opt-in sort of decision versus an accidental, side effect. Simon Brown calls this Uncle Bob does as well, this idea of screaming architecture, that your architecture on disk should represent the architecture you intend. So that was part of the idea, is like, get all these different CQRS mediator handlers separated out by use case, so it's very obvious to us developers that this is intended for this purpose and not something else.
Yeah. That's a very. I've read Uncle Bob's Clean Architecture book, which man. Honestly, that book should probably just be called, feature-driven code organization or something like that, because that's really the core concept. And if you have a house, you don't have a house full of hallways, doors, and windows, and floors and ceilings. You have a house that has a living room, that has a bathroom, that has a bedroom. So
I remember one of my big UI projects I worked on started with Angular JS. I don't know if you remember that one. It's the thing before Angular, the old one. And they were all like ex-Java developers. There was very much going this kind of like organizing by these big sort of layers there. And when they went to just plain Angular, the shift they also made was to do this exact same thing where they said, let's stop organizing a kind of kind or type and let's organize by function so that we have like our component next to the unit test, next to the CSS for that component, and they just all kind of group together. So you kind of see that everywhere now, this sort of component oriented, keep things together, cohesive organizational style. And this, I mean, we obviously the MediatR didn't invent any of this stuff, but it very much tries to encourage that style.
Right. Well, let's jump over to AutoMapper, kind of the same thing. What might a developer be wrestling with where if they just used AutoMapper, their life would be so much easier?
So AutoMapper does a couple of things. First of all, it's automates the mapping from a more complex structure, a more complex object, and typically that's going to be your like entity framework data model where things are connected, you have relationships between things, you've got navigation properties, and it can be pretty complex. It's a very tangled web of things you can build in your more complex data model. But when it comes time to getting that out into the user interface, you don't want that complex model traveling outwards toward, through an API. You don't want that model going out to render on HTML because it's got so many different things going on. They could easily break. You're just like, no. I want to only provide the data that I intend to provide, which is typically some kind of view model or DTO that is a dumbed down version of that. But there's two issues with that architecture of having a dumbed down model for the UI or the kind of end user. One is just all that kind of boring code going back and forth of just, A.B equals, C.B and just kind of go like that. That was one thing we ran into is just like that code is not very fun to write. And it's easy to mess up. Like you can miss properties or I forgot to miss this property. You can write unit tests, but like your unit test could be wrong as well. You could forget to have a property unit test. So one was just, okay, let's make sure that we fill everything on the left with something on the right. So just like make sure everything has got something in it. So that was one problem, just, simplify this developer task. The second thing we wanted to do was cut down on a lot of the sort of micro developer opinions that would creep in building those DTOs, because developers would get, I don't say lazy, but finding shorter ways of doing things in less amount of time and less amount of work, which should be like, okay, I don't like this name of this property called, customer account name. Could I just call it account name? And like someone's making just a micro decision at that point in time to shorten something. But I'm also a follower of DDD. It's on one of his books back here somewhere. And one of the big tenets in DDD is this idea that having a shared language between the developers and the product owners and the Scrum, like everyone involved in the team should have a shared language. And if developers making these little decisions to cut corners on the language, then we start having this translation problem of, oh, that account number, that's actually the customer account number. It's not the business account. We just we shortcut on this one page, but it's no big deal. So those kind of like death by 1,000 shortcuts was something we also wanted to eliminate and just say like, stop injecting your opinion. That doesn't matter. What it really should it should match the names. So the other thing AutoMapper enforces is a naming convention that says the thing in the left needs to match the thing in the right. But if you need to flatten things out, so like if you have customer.account.name, it could just go to a property called customer account name. Just remove the dots and everything will line up. So we had like a goal of, we want to enforce this ubiquitous language, this shared language to make the names all line up, make sure that everything has its match, but also don't have a bunch of like a big burden on the developers with it to keep running a tool or go have to configure something every single time. That it's there to kind of enforce a sane convention. So you focus on just like building these DTOs and match and not worry about all the kind of like underlying nitty gritty details there.
Yeah. So you mentioned denormalizing from a DDD. You didn't say aggregate root, but that's what popped into my head. Which could be a graph of objects with bi-directional references and whatnot. That's actually normal with Entity Framework, bi-directional mapping to a database and whatnot, and out to the web. Is it the same thought process if you need to send one of these over Azure Service Bus or some other transport?
Yeah, it's the same idea, right? You're not gonna put your complex aggregates on a message on the wire on Azure Service Bus or RabbitMQ, right? It's way too much information. You're sharing implementation details. You're saying like encapsulated, behind the scenes information. So it's the same thing. Like you don't want to give your connection string out to anyone that asks. And the same thing, I don't want to expose out my internal entity structure out to anyone. That's going to look very similar, but there's always going to be things that you don't want to expose out there. And this just enforces that, where you say, I'm going to build a model that is only what I want to expose, nothing more, nothing less. And then AutoMapper takes care of the grunt work of doing the mapping between those properties. One of the things we found as well was like, you have complex models. When if you try to render those directly, you're gonna pretty quickly run into the issue of eager fetching, lazy loading. Like part of the thing is missing, part of it's not. And so this helps enforce that as well, is that this DTO is not connected to a database whatsoever through any magic or anything. It is just a plain DTO object. And so you kind of guarantee that, okay, this is exactly the data I need and nothing more, nothing less. Nothing can accidentally fetch the world underneath the covers accidentally through lazy loading or something weird like that.
Yeah. What's your view, and this is really an architecture question, what's your view on distributed applications if you have multiple components and they're all going to have your core library anyway, but you just have multiple things running and there needs to be some communication if you have a WPF desktop application, which is going to be, a rich representation of a customer list and maybe take advantage of some of the validation and whatnot, but it's not connected directly to SQL Server. It's going through some type of, web service API. And then, so what do you think the best mix is? Do you flatten it out and then unflatten it? How do you approach that?
Yes. Good question. So typically the responses, when you're talking about these DTO things, those are tailored for specific use cases. So I don't speculatively create APIs unless there's like a business reason to do so. And even then, like, okay, well then what should our model look like? We need to have design discussions about what the shape of the API should actually be. So if I'm building up a public API for external consumption, I'm going to spend quite a long time figuring out what the design of that API needs to look like based on use cases.
But so many APIs are just used by our own team, right?
Yes. So for those, my APIs are purpose built. If I've got a Blazor app or a spa, on top of an API, then I make that API designed explicitly for what that UI needs. Now, if someone else needs something, then we can have that conversation. But I very much subscribe to the idea of building targeted, encapsulated APIs and models for specific purposes. And if the purpose is to be shared amongst lots of other systems, then you need to design that explicitly. I don't do the thing of like, oh, well, we've got an API. Can't we just, quote, expose that API to the outside world? Like, we can, but now you've got a client base that you have no control over, and you can't just start changing names or changing things or taking away this, taking away that. When I'm building an API and a UI together, I want to move very quickly. I don't want to care about other clients. I'm like, well, that page we don't need anymore. So delete the API, delete the page. Good to go. I still do some server-side rendered stuff, and like, we don't have to worry about API versioning there. If we just create a model, rendered on server side, and it's done. So it's very much I will design those responses based on the intended clients and users and use cases, and don't just like accidentally, just expose whatever to whoever.
Right. So you've done a tremendous amount of work on distributed systems and in Hibernate and in
Service
Bus and Azure Service Bus. And those are connections. They're asynchronous, durable, guaranteed delivery, but they're how one running component can send and receive data to another running component. And it seems like all of the libraries using that mechanism of calling out or sending something to another system almost force you to create an object, and then it serializes it and sends it along the same pathway, and then the computer B just says, "Oh, I got something. How should I route this message?" Right? But it's one transport address. It's one queue.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a queue address per message type, per reason to send a message. But then we go to the web servers, and we have this web API method where we have a different address for every reason to call the computer. And I struggle with that. It's like, why are we doing this? As opposed to just have one address. If I own both sides of the wire, why don't I just have one web server and then define different messages? No, it's synchronous communication. It's not async, so that's the difference. But I have a method, I have an object. I toss it over to the web service, and then the web server, it just does the same thing. Hey, what is this? Oh, how should I route it? What have you ever thought about? Like, why are we doing private web services with totally different addresses for every reason to send a new chunk of data?
Oh gosh, there was a time when we didn't have to do that. And I think it was back in the WCF days where, and maybe I'm imagining things about, you had like sort of a single endpoint that had all this crazy payload that could then like go route internally to, I don't think we were like some SOAP payload that tells you, like, was able to get it to the right destination. But even on the sort of queuing side of things, there are folks that are looking at that stuff to have a better, at least a better description model on top of what you've built. Similar to OpenAPI, right? You have OpenAPI that lets you like, here's what a single descriptor document that says, here's all the things, here's all the operations, all the API endpoints, here's all the data structures.
Yeah.
So people are trying to do that with messaging as well. There's a project called Async API. I look at every like year or so to see like, has this caught on yet or not? I don't know. And then I think Clemens Vasters is doing something with he's doing something with JSON schema as well, to be able to have better descriptors of contracts. Because I think one thing you quickly get into in messaging is that on the wire, those message bodies are just byte array. And so you have to have a implicit agreement on both ends about what the content type and serialization format. So you can say, oh, well, you know what? HTTP has content type. So just do content type equals application JSON. Like, okay.
Yeah.
But I still have an implicit contract, even with JSON, that says I expect to have these data members as part of that. So there are folks trying to do what people have done on OpenAPI on the messaging side on a couple of things. I think that would go a long way. I don't think we're ever to the point yet, though, like OpenAPI, where I can just say, here's my YAML or JSON document, go generate all the whatever things, contracts, channel, whatever. I don't know if we'll ever get there, but I look at that, I'm like, man, I wish we had something like that.
I have a little library that does this, and I've been tempted a few times, haven't I, Ty? I've been tempted a few times to send you a pull request that says, here's an implementation for a remoted handler where I can be in Blazor WebAssembly, and there's an object sending to MediatR, and the handler for this one is not in this process. It's on the process on the server, so just go ahead and remote it over there. Because we kind of do the same thing with in-service bus. It's yes, we have to serialize it just so. Yes, I can't have an infinite web of objects that serial. Yes, there's restrictions, but we designed for that. It was like, well, here, this message, something that I want done, it's going to be done on the other computer after I send it through this queue, right? So we have restrictions, but I think those problems have been solved. We do it in distributed computing all the time. I'm like, well, shoot, I don't want it async request response. I want it blocking wait for the response. So I'm like, And I've been so tempted to submit a remoted handler pull request.
That's funny because that's a great example of one of the reasons why I wanted to go commercial was because when I was at Headspring, I was there for 13 years. It grew to something like, I don't know, 100 or 150 employees at the end before the company sold.
Yeah.
Which meant I had a huge user base of projects and people using libraries. And we were doing, tech lead meetings every couple of weeks where we'd get feedback and not just AutoMapper Mediator, but all of our work to be able to feed back in to all the stuff we were doing and build on top of that. So going independent, I lost any connection to a direct user base of people doing stuff. So your example, I've made one sample Blazor app and that's it. I just don't do a lot of that work. So I don't have any connection to people actually using the library to see where, what should be in there, what shouldn't be in there. Yeah. I lost that. So that would be great to have, have actual user base again, where I could develop features for specific problems that I'm no longer directly connected to because I'm not part of a big consulting company anymore. So I just don't have that connection anymore. I just have, my one client or, handful of clients, and that's it.
Right. Yeah. Well, it was a Blazor application where I uncovered that need back in 2021. And so I have the implementation. All right, maybe I'll get off my butt and send you a pull request and see what you think. But with Blazor WebAssembly, I mean, MediatR is perfectly happy running inside WebAssembly. There's no problem whatsoever. And
I didn't know that.
Well, it's .NET Standard. Yeah, it's .NET Standard 2.0. I mean, WebAssembly, it's like whatever. It's a library. I'm running. And
there are things that it can't do. And this is both with AutoMapper and MediatR, is neither of them are very AOT friendly.
That's a different animal. Yeah.
Different animal altogether. But again, I have 0 clients that care about AOT at all. For all of them, their hot path is always like the database, the startup, cold start of that. Like they're not building a bazillion Azure web or Azure functions. Like it's still like an app with APIs. So like they don't care about startup time. That's just it completely immaterial for their systems. But it is important to a lot of folks. And I'm like, well, I would love to look into it, but I have no means to do so right now. So that's what I'm looking. Yeah. That's another thing I would love to look at is these features that I've ignored. Oh God, even a MediatR a year or so ago, I had this purge of GitHub issues where I literally just closed every single issue because I was tired of looking at it. It's like, I don't know what these are. I haven't read any of them. Select all, close. Which, by the way, don't do that because it turns out the UI in GitHub does not make it explicit that it's going to close those as fixed. And so I had like 100 people come at me like, "Oh, what version is this in?" I'm like, "No version."
Oops. Nice. Well, so you're still an independent consultant. Are you still doing project work, or you turned all of your attention to corporate support for users of the libraries?
No, I still the goal of this was not to replace consulting. The goal was to provide some vehicle funding so I could do part-time of this throughout the year and not just be guilty, feeling so guilty that I did nothing on it. So I still love building stuff, helping clients. I want to have consulting still going forward. So that's the idea, is that this would at least help me fund some of my time to work on those libraries as well and that as well. But still 80% of my time is, working on clients, building stuff, shipping stuff, what I like to do.
Nice. We'll include a link to the GitHub for MediatR and AutoMapper. Are there any other places that have good samples or example apps besides that we should also include?
I do maintain some kind of example apps that use those things, and mainly for my selfish purpose of making sure I don't break anything in an actual app. For example, I took both eShop and Contoso, like the Microsoft sample projects, and converted those to use AutoMapper, MediatR, vertical slices, even in Service Bus and stuff, like the common stuff. So Yeah, I'll definitely be happy to drop some links on there to those example projects too.
And is that the one that's in github.com/jbogard?
That's the one.
Perfect. All right, we'll include that. Well, Jimmy, thanks so much for coming back on the show, talking AutoMapper and MediatR and a little bit of architecture preferences mixed in.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure and DevOps podcast. You can find us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Visit our sponsor, ClearMeasure, at www.clearmeasure.com. And on behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.